This scenario reflects documented survival situations in extreme environments where isolated individuals face starvation. Military rations are designed for long-term storage, with some historical examples remaining edible for decades under proper conditions. The nutritional degradation of preserved food follows predictable chemical patterns, primarily involving vitamin loss and texture changes. In survival contexts, consuming aged rations presents calculated risks versus the certainty of starvation. Historical accounts describe similar dilemmas, where stranded individuals discovered abandoned supplies. The psychological pressure of isolation compounds the physical challenge of finding viable nutrition. Military storage facilities in remote regions sometimes contain supplies forgotten for generations. This situation illustrates how survival often depends on accessing resources from previous human activity in harsh environments. Long-term polar isolation survival presents unique physiological challenges beyond typical wilderness scenarios. The human body requires specific caloric intake to maintain core temperature in extreme cold environments. Isolation in these environments can lead to psychological effects distinct from other survival situations. Food procurement becomes exponentially difficult when traditional hunting and gathering options are limited. The constant battle against hypothermia requires continuous energy expenditure, even during rest periods. Water acquisition presents particular challenges when most available water is frozen solid. These environments test both physical endurance and mental resilience through sensory deprivation and monotony. The combination of nutritional stress and environmental pressure creates a compounding survival challenge. High-latitude abandoned settlements typically consist of prefabricated structures designed for temporary industrial or research purposes. These locations often lack permanent infrastructure, relying on seasonal supply deliveries that cease after operations end. Arctic winter conditions can reduce visibility to near zero and drop temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius. Transport failure in such regions often involves mechanical issues with snow vehicles or aircraft grounded by weather. Communication blackouts are common due to satellite signal obstruction and lack of terrestrial networks. The physiological clock for survival begins immediately, as core body temperature can drop dangerously within hours in extreme cold. Remoteness means rescue assets may be days away, requiring air support that cannot deploy in severe storms. Such scenarios illustrate how logistical dependency and environmental extremes combine to create inescapable traps. The initial stranding typically involves a critical mechanical failure that isolates the individual from civilization. This could be a vehicle breakdown, a missed supply ship, or a downed aircraft in an inaccessible location. The survivor is left with limited initial supplies that must be rationed carefully from the start. Communication systems fail, leaving no functioning way to call for immediate help. The realization sets in that rescue, if it ever comes, could be seasons away due to the remote location. This creates a psychological burden of extended isolation with uncertain survival prospects. The immediate priority becomes securing basic necessities: shelter, water, and food sources. Every decision carries weight as resources diminish and environmental challenges intensify. The group entered an abandoned storage area within the derelict complex. Their attention was drawn to stacks of metal containers, distinct from modern packaging. The tins were military-issue preserved rations, designed for long-term storage. This type of packaging, often using thick steel and lead solder, was common decades ago. Such finds indicate a former military presence, possibly for training or logistical support. Unlike modern MREs, these older rations were simpler, focusing on caloric density and preservation. The discovery of a cache suggests the site was once actively supplied and then left behind. This pattern is observed at various decommissioned installations worldwide. The survivor faced a stark choice: risk consuming decades-old emergency rations or succumb to starvation. This decision required systematic risk assessment, beginning with visual inspection of each container. Bulging or severely damaged cans were immediately discarded, as these are classic signs of bacterial contamination and botulism risk. For cans that passed visual inspection, the survivor employed a cautious sampling protocol. A tiny test portion was consumed first, followed by a waiting period to monitor for any immediate adverse physical reactions. This reliance on canning's preservation principles was a calculated gamble. The technology, when intact, can create an anaerobic environment that prevents microbial growth for extended periods. However, the integrity of decades-old seals is never guaranteed, making this a perilous but sometimes necessary act of consumption. The survivor's diet was monotonous and nutritionally uncertain, consisting primarily of old meats, hardtacks, and preserved fats. Such a limited diet lacks essential vitamins and minerals, leading to conditions like scurvy from vitamin C deficiency or pellagra from a lack of niacin. Old meats and hardtack, while preserved, offer poor nutritional density and are difficult for the body to digest over long periods. Preserved fats provided crucial calories for energy, but a diet overly reliant on them can lead to digestive distress and does not support long-term health. The 438-day timeline indicates the survivor endured these dietary conditions for over 14 consecutive months. This sustained endurance under nutritional stress represents an extreme physiological and psychological challenge. The human body can enter a state of conservation, slowing metabolism to survive on minimal intake. But this comes at a severe cost to muscle and organ function. Comparatively, modern survival guidelines emphasize varied nutrition. Such a limited diet for over a year would be considered unsustainable by medical standards. Survival in such conditions required managing multiple critical systems simultaneously. Food procurement was just one challenge. Securing clean water from melted snow was equally vital. Shelter maintenance in decaying structures became a constant battle against the elements. The psychological toll of total isolation, combined with constant physical danger, created immense mental strain. Medical documentation from such ordeals is often absent, leaving gaps in our understanding of physiological impacts. While canned rations from a century ago might remain technically safe to consume, nutrient degradation over decades is significant. Food preservation methods like canning prevent spoilage, but cannot stop the gradual breakdown of vitamins and proteins. This creates a paradox where survival food may be edible yet nutritionally inadequate for long-term health. The survivor's location and identity remain unconfirmed by official sources, with rescue details similarly unclear. Contrary to popular belief, this is not a story about conveniently finding a grocery store. The rations discovered were a desperate, last-resort food source, not a comfortable or planned solution. This highlights a critical survival misconception. Old rations are not a reliable plan. In survival situations, food degradation and contamination pose significant risks over time. This case serves as a stark reminder that true survival often depends on preparation and knowledge, not chance discoveries. Improperly preserved canned goods can harbor deadly pathogens like botulism, which causes paralysis and respiratory failure. Botulism toxin is one of the most potent natural poisons known, requiring only microscopic amounts to be lethal. In survival scenarios, hypothermia often proves deadlier than starvation, as core body temperature drops below critical levels. Untreated injuries from falls or accidents can lead to infection and sepsis, compounding other survival challenges. Psychological collapse under extreme stress impairs decision-making and reduces the will to survive. These factors, environmental threats, physical trauma, and mental strain, form a deadly triad in wilderness emergencies. Practical wilderness safety requires preparing for multiple, simultaneous threats, not just food shortages. Human resilience in extreme conditions depends on addressing physiological, environmental, and psychological needs together. The redundancy principle is a fundamental rule in wilderness survival and expedition planning. It states that any travel in remote areas requires multiple, independent communication and evacuation plans. This principle is applied by professional guides, research teams, and military units operating in isolated regions. A single point of failure, like one radio or one planned exit route, can become catastrophic if it malfunctions. For example, a primary radio should be backed by a secondary, and a satellite messenger should be backed by signal flares. Evacuation plans must also be redundant, with multiple potential extraction points and methods identified in advance. This layered approach mitigates risk from equipment failure, adverse weather, or unexpected terrain obstacles. Ignoring this principle has been a common factor in documented survival incidents where rescue was delayed. The science of food preservation reveals that canning, while robust, has clear physical limits. These limits are defined by factors like acidity, processing time, and temperature control. Improper canning can fail to destroy harmful bacteria, leading to spoilage or foodborne illness. This contrasts with folklore methods that may rely on untested traditions rather than verified science. The mechanism is straightforward. Heat and vacuum seal are used to create a sterile environment. However, if the seal is compromised or processing is insufficient, the preservation fails. This scientific understanding applies universally, regardless of the food being preserved. It underscores that safety in food preservation depends on measurable, repeatable processes, not anecdote. Survival isn't about testing spoiled food's limits, but about understanding the precise science of shelf life and the real biological risks involved. Food spoilage follows predictable chemical and microbial patterns, where time, temperature, and moisture create environments for pathogens. The risks are not mystical curses, but documented medical outcomes like food poisoning, botulism, or nutritional deficiency. Enduring extreme isolation for over a year requires a psychological infrastructure far beyond basic survival skills. This mental framework involves coping mechanisms for prolonged solitude, routine maintenance, and cognitive preservation. Without this psychological preparation, the mind can deteriorate even if the body has sufficient physical resources. Historical cases of hermits, explorers, and prisoners of war demonstrate the critical role of this mental discipline in long-term survival. It is a system built on foresight, self-regulation, and an understanding of human psychological limits, not just bravery or luck. In survival scenarios, structuring daily routines provides psychological stability against despair. Maintaining hope functions as a cognitive tool, similar to practical skills like fire building, to counteract inertia. This psychological discipline is often overlooked, but is as critical as physical survival knowledge. Systematic scavenging in abandoned human infrastructure significantly multiplies survival chances. This involves searching for usable tools, materials, and sometimes forgotten caches left behind. Unlike random looting, this pattern is a deliberate, efficient reuse of existing resources. It transforms human remnants from mere debris into a strategic advantage for endurance. This approach leverages past human activity to create a buffer against immediate scarcity. This analysis examines the psychological mechanisms behind extreme survival decisions. When all available choices carry severe consequences, the decision-making process shifts from seeking benefit to minimizing harm. This is a pattern observed in documented survival scenarios, from financial ruin to physical isolation. The rationality involved is not about good outcomes, but about navigating a landscape of unavoidable loss. Persistence under such conditions relies on cognitive adaptations that prioritize immediate survival over long-term planning. These documented cases provide a window into a reality far removed from everyday experience. The core takeaway is the human capacity to function and make consecutive, calculated choices within sustained extreme adversity.